right, so here we are with another episode of Coffee with the Founder. I got my coffee cup, I got my coffee drink, and of course, we got another phenomenal guest with us, a good friend, a good brother, colleague, Ross Wilburn. Ross, we are doing these coffee talks as a way to introduce people to our WPC family, the folks who have been a part or connected to the conference, to myself, over the years. And so we're glad that you're here. We're going to get started right away. Just ask you, who are you and what do you do?
All right. Well, thank you, Eddie. A great idea to put this together. And it's been a while since it's been within the year that I've seen each other. But you speak of the WC family going way back. I'm thinking way back to Pella. We were just talking. And since then, I've been on quite a journey, like we all have. I'm currently in the Iowa House of Representatives, and I'm the fifth African American currently in the House of Representatives. There are five at this point, all happen to be Democrats. But I live in Ames, Iowa, so I represent District 46, which is kind of the central core on up to the north of Ames, and so a pretty broad, diverse district in terms of age and race and students and the whole gamut. So that's what I'm doing right now, and a lot of different issues have been coming up in the House. But I've been in Ames for, it'll be 6 years this fall now, and I was in Iowa City, as you know, before that, from 1982 for school at University of Iowa up until, like I said, 6 years ago. Former mayor of Iowa City. I was the first African-American mayor of Iowa City. Throughout that whole time, I've been a youth worker. I've been in education with the Iowa City School District. I work for Iowa State Extension and Outreach right now as a diversity advisor and community economic development. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah. Well, I was, just because you lived in Ames, I was a little hesitant to don my Hawkeye hat, but I just was reminded by you, that's right, you had not only some time in Iowa City, but you fly a little Hawkeye flag every now and then. So I know you got to be careful in your district, but I'll just represent for a second right here.
I represent Ames and the Amesians who live in Cyclone Land and in Story County, but I always tell folks, as the former mayor of Iowa City, if I didn't cheer for the Hawks, they wouldn't let me back in town.
That's right. Now, I want to ask you about being mayor, leadership, how that happens, what that looks like, and if Black leadership is different and how that may be. But before that, let me ask you about the House, Iowa House, because some people may not even know what that means. So when you say you're in the Iowa House of Representatives, what does that mean? What is that job? Give us a sense of that.
Absolutely. Every state has a government that runs the state level government. I kind of push the parallel is when you turn on TV or look in the news and see in Washington, D.C. with the president, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Well, Iowa has a similar in terms of state level government for things that happen in the state of Iowa. And with the governor being the executive branch, and we have a legislative branch, a Senate, and a House of Representatives. So I'm in the House of Representatives, and I serve one of the districts, and my district, I said, is in Ames, central part of Iowa. And you, like any office, you have to put your name in and try and get people to vote for you. And so regardless of the level of government, that's what you have to do. And the state government, anywhere from, public infrastructure, healthcare, transportation, the environment, education, all of those things, the state passes policy or bills that affect you and how that affects you, young and old. It also, we appropriate or put money towards some of those projects. And so that's what it's all about. And, it's when people say, especially sometimes I have to say our people will say, well, my vote doesn't matter, vote doesn't count. Well, it does matter. And because there wouldn't be five of us in the House of Representatives right now, in terms of African American. At this point, there are no members of the Latinx community there. And again, it takes communities, not just communities of color, but all people to get out who are looking for, if you're happen to be progressive, a progressive agenda, or one that's inclusive, you've got to get out and vote. I know, in fact, when I was in local office, there was a city nearby, Iowa City at the time, where their mayor's race was a tie. And the provision to decide who was the mayor, it wasn't a recount or another election. They put the names in a coffee can and pulled the name out. And so that can make a difference in terms of when you're thinking of where you're, how much tax comes out of your paycheck, whether you've got any type of support, if you receive Medicare or Medicaid, or the street you drive down. Your voice can make a difference, but you got to get out and vote to do it.
Yeah. So, Ross, did you grow up wanting to be mayor, wanting to be in the House? I mean, how did you get here? Give us a sense of the journey from where you got started to where you are now.
Right. I did not grow up having any idea that I would be a member of the House of Representatives or a mayor or a city council member. But the fact that when I was in Galesburg, Illinois, growing up through the end of 5th grade, which would have been 1975, there were some role models in our town. One African-American on a police officer, Roy Coleman was his name, in Galesburg, Illinois. Another was Jesse Perez, a detective with the Galesburg, Illinois Police Department. And just the fact that they were in those positions and trying to serve the community, that kind of planted that seed. In addition to, my parents, my mom, gave me that interest that if you want to, have positive things happen in your life, you've got to reach out and try and help make sure that there are positive things going on for your neighbors, your friends, your relatives, your community. And so that's where it started. And as it turned out, just prior to getting elected, I was a youth counselor, youth and family counselor at a place called United Action for Youth in Iowa City. And I was part of a group of youth workers affiliated with that agency, with a national network for, at the time, runaway and homeless youth. And we would go once a year to a conference in Washington, D.C., just like you and a lot of the folks at the privileged conference go and do. And we, at the time, we were trying to help reauthorize what was known then as the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. And after that, every other year, funds to be appropriated so that runaway and homeless youth shelters had funding to do what they do. And so that just working with congressional staff, providing information to them about how youth and families are affected by just being at risk while they're in homeless for a lot of health conditions or economic struggles, that they were asking me and us for information. And I thought, I could do this. I wasn't thinking necessarily that I wanted to or involved running for office, but I thought in order to help influence this, there's nothing different about them than me. And in fact, I tell a lot of young people now, they'll say, oh, you're a representative, or you were a mayor. It's like, there's nothing different about me than there is about you, and you can get involved, and you can try and work with your friends and neighbors to make a difference. And so I ran for city council the first time. I say the first time because I didn't make it the first time. Mm. But because I ran a positive campaign, because there weren't any other people of color involved in the local government at the time, it helped kind of draw attention to myself that I was someone interested in trying to improve the community. In fact, there was a young African-American male that was I was one of his counselors, and he had said at the time, he said, he was 14, yeah, and he said, a black man can't win a city. Well, I didn't get into the fact that there had been one, George Strait was his name, was a former law professor, ran the law library at University of Iowa. I said, I don't know that until I try. And I didn't win, but I got the attention of the media, and they said, watch out for this guy next time. But the city council at the time appointed me to a city commission, the Parks and Recreation Commission, which kind of went in line with some of the youth work with what I was doing. And a couple of years later, I ran again. I didn't make it that time, but I made it past a primary. But I knew that young man. He had said, in fact, that time I ran at large. And so he saw me, said, so you're living large, right? He didn't know what it meant, but he was paying attention.
Right.
He went from a black man can't win to you're living large. And then the third time I ran, I won. I think it was with 60% of the vote. And that election day, he said, Mr. Wilburn, he said, I turned 18 today and I voted for you. And that I'm getting a chill just thinking about the fact that we went from disenfranchisement, uninformed about the process, to getting engaged, to him taking action to get. I mean, I'm more proud of that vote than any vote I've received. Just thinking back about that. So that's kind of how it began.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, it just speaks to the impact you have as an educator, as a youth worker, as a leader, and sometimes you don't even know the impact you're having on folks. That's just really powerful. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, I was going to ask
if I could, what you just said, you don't realize the impact that you have on folks. There's two parts to that. One, there's different types of leadership. Not everybody's a charismatic speaker, but some people just get involved and do the hard work or just include. The second piece to that is I remember it would have been in the mid 2000s, I went back to Galesburg, Illinois to the mayor. I think it was the 2000s, yeah. And I was at the mall there. And a senior citizen had approached me, and she said, you're Ross Wilburn. I didn't know who she was. I said, yes, ma'am, I am. And she said, you won't remember this, but when you were in kindergarten, my grandson was school had already started, and I had walked with him up to the school, and I tried to push him to go start playing with some of the kids before school started. And the group you're with took off running to go play somewhere else. And you turned around, you were the only one turned around and said, hey, come on, you can play with us. And so, I remembered it as soon as she said it, but, just the small act of kindness from a child left an impact on her. And I was in a position where, circumstances, she was able to relate that story to me. So you just don't know the impact you can have,
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you, as you go about doing the work, the impact that you're having, not only in the community, but across the state, what are you saying to young people in reference to getting them engaged, getting them involved, to inspire them to participate in the process of government, of civil engagement, but potentially even run for office? Because as you mentioned, there's only 5. There's no Latinx. Like, we could use more visible diversity presence. So what is your message to those young folks, all young folks, but particularly young folks of color that can bring some real, not that we'll all be on the same political spectrum, but at least some visible presence of difference?
Well, the first part of that is before I or before any of us go and speak to young people, we've got to go to where they're at. We can't, expect them to just automatically show up at some event, and so that we are hosting. So I like to try and, keep my eye out for where groups of young people are gathering. I'll go to a school if they're having some type of speaker series or mentorship. So I try and do that. This past year, I made sure I went to one of the preschools to read. One of those, just go in and read a particular book, book, so they could see a person of color, all youth, just seeing a person of color coming in and showing that they want to hear from them, they want to interact with them. And so first, just going to where they congregate to find out, not bringing my agenda, but just to go and listen and be with. And I can't emphasize whether you or someone thinking about running for office or not, but just if you go and be with young people where they're at and be willing to answer questions and show interest, that's the first piece of trying to get them connected to their community. I'm someone who, we may disagree about stuff, and I may not be, I may not be hip, but I'm here and I'm willing to listen and to get that connection going first. Secondly, once you have that connection, you got to try and start building on that relationship. And, it may be showing up at some of their sporting events at school. It may be, showing up at the library and walking up and just saying, hi, hey, I saw you. I saw you at school last week. I was in your classroom talking, to keep that going. And then once you get that relationship going, that's when you can start talking about, what are your plans? What are you looking forward to in life? And get a dialogue on, because it never fails. They start asking questions about, well, who are you and what do you do? And explaining just, the conversation that we're having, explaining, they don't necessarily know what a state representative or a state senator or the governor or a mayor or a city council member or county supervisor, but just to start telling them and trying to look for ways on what laws and what decisions we make as lawmakers, how that touches them, how that influences or has an influence on their life. I think that's the beginning. And then just trying to encourage them to show some and point out to them when they are involved in something, or again, not necessarily in a speaking role, but when they are showing leadership by example themselves with their peers, to commend them, to praise them, to point out to them, hey, what you're doing now, that's leadership.
Yeah.
I think that's the beginning of it. And then they start asking you questions about what's, and they'll point out, hey, that's not right. Yeah, it's not right.
Yeah.
And so we can blame someone, or we can try and get together and change that. And here's how we go about doing that.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you about your leadership style. I'm interested in how you found your groove, so to speak, what that style is and how you decided this is how I'm going to lead. And
right.
I want to ask you, in addition, though, to think about Black leadership, because I'm wondering, is that different? Is there something different about being a Black man or a Black person in a leadership position as well? Style, race.
Mm-hmm. I think that, in terms of style, I mentioned this a little earlier, that not everybody can be or needs to be a charismatic speaker, a charismatic leader. There's a lot of different ways to show by example. And one, I just talked about making connections with young people. The fact that you are willing to stop and show interest in a young person. I think that's just that connecting with people and a willingness to be and show up where they're at, and try and promote them and develop skills in them. I would suggest that's probably my leadership style. It's not always being up at the podium or at the microphone, but it's working the crowd and finding out, hey, they're talking about this, but how is it touching you? Does this matter to you? If not, what are the reasons for that? What has kept you from, participating, or the benefits? So I think part of it is that relational style. But when I need to, I'm willing to, take that risk to get in front of people, to speak up, to say something, and try not to worry about, being a charismatic speaker, but just trying to speak from the heart and make a connection to issues that are affecting young people. So one, being in African Americans are in the minority, just showing up and being in that role, whether I ask for it or not. In some ways, people will look for that leadership, or they will at least pause and stop to hear what I have to say. I think that's being willing to take that risk to step out of your comfort zone. So I'm willing to do that. I mean, I get nervous speaking, just like the next person, but I push myself out to do that because of the importance of it. So that's one difference, is regardless of where I'm at, just the fact that I'm someone who looks different. And there are people that in Iowa, there's some whites in Iowa that still have never come across, and the only African-American person they see is on TV or in the news or in the newspaper. And so we've got a strong group of advocates and in the African American community with the NAACP or in the Faith Network, and especially in the urban areas. But in my position, the jobs, I've had to make it a point to go out into some of the rural areas where there are fewer minorities or no people of color, just to be that presence and just to give someone that relationship. So I think that's part of that style for me. But I think you ask the question, you try and figure out what is your leadership style? How willing are you to put yourself out there in comfortable ways, and where are you willing to stretch yourself in an uncomfortable way? So I think part of, again, just based on the population here, people know when I walk into the room, whether I say something or not. If that's hard for some people to understand, I'll say to someone, well, if it happens to be a white male, I'll say, well, think of the times you've walked into a room you're the only male. It's all women. Do you notice that difference or not? And so just trying to help bridge that gap to get people to stop and think about, how we are different, not to drive a wedge in differences, but to what is the difference? What does it mean? And how can we bring that all together to benefit, most of it? So I think other things in terms of being a Black leader is when there's something that happens to a person of color, specifically an African or African American, and in this example, especially if it's something negative or a concern, then people will automatically look to you. Well, how's he going to react? How's she going to react if it's an African American or African woman? What do they think about this? So in some ways, it's forced upon you to be in that role of responding on behalf of our race, our ethnicity, So I guess it's just a question of whether you are comfortable trying to do something with that or not in terms of leadership. So there's some issues where I will make a decision, I'm not going to speak up on this. I want to see others in the room that may not be African American. Let's see you struggle with that uncomfortableness for a little bit, and then at the time where I think I may have the most impact, then I'll go ahead and speak. There are other times, especially if there's another legislator, a white legislator, who's put something out on Twitter that happens to be a concern about something happening in the African American community. I'll go ahead and retweet that or thank them for the comment, just because they took the risk of criticism from someone from putting out if they had concern about the stand your ground. Or today I saw a representative had tweeted something about in Oklahoma, a African-American delivery driver who was stopped in a gated community. His vehicle was blocked by the president of that homeowners association. And in that case, there was, he was not physically harmed, but just the emotional trauma that he had been through in terms of that. So, I think those are some of the ways that it's a little different. You're called upon if you're in a leadership role, and whether it's an elected role or not. There are times if you are African American, like I said, people will look to see, well, what does he or she think about that?
Yeah.
So it's I guess it's just a conscious choice, and I don't expect other African Americans to do that. I just myself, but for those who are willing to run for office or to speak up, I try and support them. For those who aren't comfortable, I try and connect with them just to find out how are you being affected by that for their own mental health. And again, to try and make connections between myself and them, and use their experience to help inform their story, to inform some of the decisions that I have to make, or the input that I have to make.
Yeah. So I think if there's any time where there's a kaleidoscope of leadership needed, is the time of COVID-19.
Yes.
Can you give us a sense of, one, how are you doing, bro? Shelter in place.
Yeah.
In reference to, having some consciousness around that, but also the larger Iowa community. How has COVID-19 impacted Iowa, and what's your sense of moving forward?
Yes, and definitely paying attention to how all of us are being affected by coronavirus 19. I thank you for the question and the concern. I've been self not necessarily self-quarantining, but making sure I've been social distancing. The few times I've been out in the past couple months, it's been to go to the co-op, the food co-op, to get some groceries, and they're doing a great job of keeping everybody safe there. I do wear a mask when I go out. Um, the um, the few times that I've been on my bicycle the last few months, it's a little easier to socially distance there, but I've been out for walks, and even if I'm going for a walk around the neighborhood, I'll put a mask on. So, I'm staying connected with people through all the Zoom meetings that I'm having, Zoom or WebEx or the other platforms. Again, going to some of them are meetings that Democrats are hosting, but others are different groups that they've invited me, or I've looked and seen that they're hosting a meeting. There's some child care providers. I went on to a Zoom meeting that they had. The local Chamber of Commerce, they had a morning coffee I went on with there, again, just to stay connected that way. Phone calls and emails, all of that, to just kind of stay connected. But it's definitely taking a toll. You can feel isolated at times. That's why I make it a point to, let me just go at least once a day, go for a walk around the block. Everybody's being impacted by this. And in terms of Iowans, I'll go back to just across the nation. There's two parts to this. One is that the structural challenges that were in place that affected people with low socioeconomic status, people of color, people that have a physical or intellectual disability, older Iowans, the things in terms of health care, mental health care, food insecurity, low wages, access to child care, all of those were structural challenges before, but now we're in a position where those are magnified. The second part to it is, especially when I've heard some individuals or groups complaining about how difficult it is to, I'm not able to get business support, or I went to workforce development and I couldn't get through on the phone, and the federal CARES Act stimulus funding that's supposed to support business, it seems to be going to bigger business and not my small or medium-sized business, and it's taking too long, and it's not going to make things right or even. I'm still going to take a loss. For some of those individuals, it's the first time in their adult lives that they've had to ask for assistance, and that's a mental emotional challenge for folks as well. Just to go through the act, and then to have the experience of, I've got it's essentially, it's not a physical line, it's more of a virtual line. I've got to wait in line to give information about myself, to find out if I qualify for unemployment, and how long is it going to get. So it's really in a unique way, it's a shared experience on what it's like to ask for help and be in a position where, through no fault of your own, you are struggling to make it. So it'll be interesting to see moving forward to whatever our transition to that new normal is going to be, how people will remember that once things are, hopefully, a vaccine will come up, or more, even more effective treatments will come up for the coronavirus. But it'll be interesting to see how people react and respond and remember this experience when others are facing different challenges in the future.
Now, spending this shelter in place, this time in place, I'm wondering, what has it taught you about Ross? But also, as you look around the state of Iowa, where you spent a great part of your career doing the work you've done, but also the nation, which, you've had some experience connecting and working with folks all across the nation. What has this time told you about you, but also the community around you and the nation, when we think about the new normal? What's next?
Yes, excellent questions, Eddie, but I always knew that about you. In terms of me, I think in some ways it's reinforced some things that were important to me. Just emphasize the importance of them, not just family and friends, but I mean just me personally. I mean, I have a lot of different interests, whether it's sports, cycling, lifting weights, yoga, music. I still play the clarinet. I play a little bit of saxophone and guitar. Those personal things of my physical health going, especially my mental health through kind of the isolation that you can experience. So I guess it's just in that way, it's reaffirmed some of the interests that I've had. They've carried me through, and I guess it's just kind of bolstered my own. I mean, I felt I had good self-esteem before, but I guess it's been even more lifting and affirming in that way that, the things that I've been interested in and care about. I mean, that's who I am, and those things have helped make me the person that I am. Faith is a part of it too, and I felt I wasn't necessarily I mean, I'm a member of the Episcopal Church, but I try to think a little beyond just the structural religion. But I guess maybe a learning is that that energy and that belief has maybe hit home even a little closer. I think both my parents are deceased. I lost my mother in 1985, just before I turned 21. Lost to cancer. Lost my father to Alzheimer's 7 years ago, and so that spiritualness was there before. But I guess just this has really reminded me how important and how much of a life it has been. Part of my life it has been as part of it. In terms of what I've learned about others, just that reminder about, in some fundamental way, when it comes down to it, there's goodness in people and the majority of people. And in many ways, people will look for some way to come together to support each other. No one wants to see, most people don't want to see someone struggling or going hungry, that type of thing. But it's also reinforced the challenges that in our society, that individualism versus collectivism community. It's even more reinforcing the wedge that some of the social media puts through there, some of the deliberate marketing strategies that have occurred over the past decade and a half to drive that wedge into people, and to see people struggle, with, they've heard this message about individualism, and you've got to be on your own or pull yourself up for your own bootstraps, and people who aren't able to do it, there's something wrong with them. These type of situations really challenge that, and to watch people struggle with that, again, I'm hopeful that, I know not all will, I won't fool myself that, but I'm hopeful that moving forward, some people will give pause, because when someone in the future is needing help and not getting into, are they deserving of help, or the accountability piece. We can't do that, or government can't do that, because they will, the old expression was living on the dole, or the false narrative about the welfare queen. It's like, well, in this particular example, welfare reform and the reform that has happened over the past, decade, in terms of that accountability that's been put there. There's relatively low fraud in that system. In fact, I always tell folks that, whatever fraud that's at the lower socioeconomic end, I don't think it's out of proportion with at the higher economic end for, the white collar crime that goes on there, in terms of embezzlement and all of those types of things. But what I have been pointing out to people is that, that fraud there's been accountability measures put in place. And so keep in mind, given this experience you've had struggling at no fault of your own, in the future, when an individual or politician or lobbying group starts talking about accountability, one person's accountability measures can be a barrier for a whole community of folks. And so that issue of fairness and whether we want people to have that ability to have that foundation so that when bad things happen, when challenges happen, let's not destroy the ability to provide that that connection, that safety network for them to lift themselves back up, or that we can lift each other back up. So think about that, that accountability, one person's accountability for a whole segment of your community.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, we're hoping as people watch these and reflect on these coffee talks, that they're really asking themselves, inquiring within, what is happening to me during this time? Where can I grow? Where can I participate more community-wise, leadership-wise? And so that's really insightful, really helpful. And I appreciate you role modeling some of that reflection. Let me ask you this. What can we expect out of you over the next 10 years? I want to put some titles out there. I want to make some predictions, but I'm going to hold back and just ask you, tell us, what can we expect from from Ross Wilburn over the next 10 years?
For the more near immediate future, I'm continuing to work in the House of Representatives, where we actually we suspended the session. We're going to start back up in June to get the budget going. So one, we're going to need to make sure we're putting a budget in place that adjusts for the economic struggles that have been happening. But I just finished talking about, we're only going to be back together as a legislator for a short period of time. So it may be limited on how much policy work we can do, but I'm up for re-election this fall. As we get into the next legislative session, just going to be spending some time trying to get some bills prepared to try and work at some of these structural constraints and just reviews in terms of, do we have our public health system? What have we learned from this experience to make sure that it's funded so that it can effectively keep our community, our society prepared for both prevention, as well as be prepared to have a place to grow from intervention. Some of the structural challenges in terms of the places where we've got essential workers, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the meatpacking industry, whether it's some of the senior living, some of our child care systems, trying to put some bills in place to make sure that we have those strong necessities in our community so that people can go and get a job and know that they've got child care and not have to worry about whether they can afford to have child care or to take a particular job, knowing they've got to drive a certain distance. So, and climate and environment, those type of things. But I did run for governor a couple of years ago. I didn't get I was on the ballot and as a Democrat, but I didn't get the Democratic nomination. I don't say it was a failure because it connected me with a lot more Iowans and allowed them to get to know me. It led to me being able to run for this position to get in the House of Representatives. And with the 5 African-American legislators, the Black Legislative Caucus, we're continuing to take a look at legislation trying to so that we can, if we get in the majority, to mandate it so that when a minority impact statement on any policy is put forth, that analysis is done when we ask for it. Those are some of the things that taking a look at. I'd like to get into a women's health issues, to look at some challenges there that the disproportionate impact on minority women. Those are some of the things I want to look at. A little further down the road, Iowa has never had its first African-American governor, and whether that's me or someone that I can support, that's something that I'd like to see happen down the road.
Yeah. Well, I'm with Ross. That's all I'm going to say right now. And I feel like I'm part Iowa. I spent so much time. Yeah, I spent so much time there. I feel like I'm part. Let me ask you 5 things in 5 minutes. Okay.
Okay. All
Just
right.
quick, short. Who you going with? Tina Turner or Janet Jackson?
Oh man. I gotta go with Tina.
You got to go with Tina.
I go with Tina.
Okay. Okay.
Just that. I mean, that's way going way back, and just and her longevity.
And I learned, okay. Okay. Now, are you going to go with Steve Harvey or are you going to go with Richard Pryor?
Oh, I'm gonna go with Steve. I'm gonna go with Steve Harvey. You know, Richard. That's going way back to when I was a kid. But Steve Harvey. He just gets me going. Gets a good belly laugh out of me.
Yeah. Now, Taylor Swift or Lady Gaga?
I'm going with Lady Gaga there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So give me your sense of the state of education as you look ahead. What comes up for you when you think about education?
I believe that well, education is key. I mean, it is that opportunity for people to, especially people of color, communities of color, to build from, and for us to be good consumers of information, even if you're not a researcher yourself, but to know how to look at information and to demand information be provided from your policymakers, from your mayors and governors and presidents. Um, Unfortunately, public education, I'm a big supporter of that. It's great if you are into private education, you're towards public education so that we are not eroding um, um, the public education system. That it's an opportunity for all there, and the attack and erosion of the funding and policies that are support. I mean, I just saw recently that the measures that the education secretary has taken to put some limits or to erode some policy and funding for people with a disability in terms of whether it's special education or Section 504, any challenges to those. I mean, that's just taking away the possibility for opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I want to ask you one last thing. We're collecting a list of what to watch, what to listen to, what to read, just to expand people's quarantine options since we're shelter in place in different ways across different states, of course. But have you discovered or have you been watching or listening to anything you'd like to add to our list before you go?
A lot of people will probably say this, but I really enjoyed Michelle Obama's Becoming Netflix show there. It took me back to being involved in the presidential campaign and the people that I met and the connections that we made. But it was also a nice reminder and actually some of the challenges that she rattled off in terms of being her husband being a candidate and the criticism and scrutiny that she was under. Some of that resonated with me, on a smaller level because, I'm not, I'm in state government and have been in local government, but some of that really rang true for me. But otherwise, I've been doing a little old school too. I'd listened to, like just before we started talking, I was listening to Al Jarreau and George Benson did a collaboration years back. Al Jarreau unfortunately has passed away, but there was a song called "Don't Start No Stuff." So those are two things I'd put out there.
Well, anybody that can put together Michelle Obama and Al Jarreau is a friend of mine, bro. I appreciate that. Listen, we appreciate you giving us some of your time, and I've always appreciated your love, your friendship over the years, man, since we met each other. You've always been supporting me and my work, and I just want to wish you the best of luck, and anything I can do to support you, we can support you as a conference. And you're always welcome to come by, hang out with us whenever we're nearby. But thank you, my brother. I appreciate you. Take care.
Absolutely.
Be safe in Iowa.
Be well.
All right, man.
All right, man.